Good day everyone, Dr. Polaris here. Choristodera is an extinct order of semiaquatic diapsid reptiles that ranged from the Middle Jurassic, or possibly Late Triassic, to at least the Early Miocene. The largest and most derived forms resembled modern Gharials, while more basal genera were smaller and lizard-like. Choristoderans have been found in North America, Asia and Europe, and possibly also North Africa and East Timor. The most common fossils are typically found from the late Cretaceous to the lower Eocene. Cladistics have placed them between basal diapsids and basal Archosauromorphs, but the phylogenetic position of Choristodera is still uncertain. More recently, analyses have tentatively placed Choristodera within Archosauromorpha, with their ear bone anatomy more closely correlating to those of archosaurs than those of lepidosaurs. In most phylogenetic trees, Choristoderans are recovered as the most basal of all Archosauromorphs. If this is indeed the case, then these animals must have a very long ghost lineage stretching back to the late Permian at least. Long considered to be a morphologically conservative group, recent phylogenetic analyses and descriptions of new taxa have revolutionized the understanding of this group. Until the late 20th century, only the Gharial-like genre, such as Champsosaurus, were well known. However, the opening up of fossil sites in China has revealed a wealth of very well preserved small basal genera. Many of these were long-necked piscivores, with proportionately tiny skulls and elongated tails. The genus Hyphalosaurus is particularly well known, with thousands of specimens recovered from the famous early Cretaceous Liaoning rocks of northeastern China. Some forms, such as Mondurasuchus, were stocky and somewhat resembled salamanders or the Chinese crocodile lizard. Exactly how these animals were related to each other is an ongoing work in progress, but a recent study by Matsumoto et al. Has found that the late Jurassic Catenia genus is the most basal known Choristoderan. Fossils of Catenia genus are known from the late Jurassic of Portugal and the late Jurassic Age Morrison Formation of the western United States. A handful of skull and jaw fragments from the late Cretaceous Oldman Formation and Dinosaur Park Formation in Canada were assigned to this genus by Gow and Fox in 1998. Given the long gap in time, however, it was cautioned that these animals should probably constitute a different, as yet unnamed, genus. The animal was 25 to 50 centimeters long, and probably weighed less than 500 grams. The skull was long and slender, and the jaws had numerous conical teeth. Catenia genus in the Morrison Formation probably fed on insects and small fish. It is mostly known from freshwater sites such as rivers and ponds, and is a rare find in the formation overall, mostly from the northern outcrops, particularly in Wyoming, although this may reflect a preservation bias against small animals in terrestrial settings, rather than an accurate reflection of Catenia genus populations in the Morrison. From here, the Choristoderan family tree splits in two directions. One branch led to the Gharial-like Neochoristoderans, and the other to a collection of smaller forms that have yet to receive a group name. The most basal member of the latter was only described in 2019, Ceruleo draco from the late Jurassic of China. This animal is significant as the most complete Jurassic Choristoderan found worldwide. The skeleton was small, about 20 centimeters in length, not including the tail. Ceruleo draco had a generalized, lizard-like body type. The skull had a short, pointed snout with about 38 teeth on each side, and the neck was short, a situation quite different from certain other Choristoderans in this lineage. Three other genera quite closely related to this animal were all native to Eurasia during the Cretaceous and the Cenozoic. One of these was Mondurasuchus, which lived in what is now China and Japan during the early Cretaceous. It had large eyes, a rounded skull, robust legs with short claws, and a long thin tail. Fossils have been found that preserve soft tissue, showing that it had soft skin and webbed feet. Mondurasuchus was first found in China as part of the early Cretaceous Jehol biota. Named in 1940, the type species Mondurasuchus splendens was the first reptile described from the Yiqian Formation. The holotype was lost during World War II, but was replaced in 2000 by a recently discovered neotype preserving soft tissue remains. In 2007, remains were described from the Okuradani formation of the Tetori group in Japan. The Japanese material represents a different species that has not yet been named. Monjurasuchus was a small Choristoderan, reaching a length of 40 centimeters with a 5 centimeter long skull. Unlike related forms, Monjurasuchus had a relatively short neck with 8 vertebrae, one less than usual. The skull is rounded rather than pointed, and is flattened in all fossils. The eye sockets are large, and prominent temporal regions extend from the back of the skull. The jaws are lined with small, sharp teeth, while the palate is covered in closely spaced tooth batteries. The skin of this animal has a similar appearance to the living Chinese crocodile lizard Shinisaurus. The feet were webbed, with skin covering all parts of the foot except for the short claws. The limbs were robust and the hips were wide. A similar, and probably closely related genus was Philidrosaurus, also from the early Cretaceous of China. However, a far more unexpected relative lived up until the early Miocene in Europe, the mysterious Lazarussuchus. Native to France, Germany and the Czech Republic, fossils have been found from the late Paleocene, the late Oligocene and the early Miocene, meaning that the genus lasted for about 40 million years. 2 species have been named. The type species, Lazarussuchus inexpectatus, from the late Oligocene of France and Germany, and Lazarussuchus dvoraki, from the early Miocene of the Czech Republic. It was not a large animal. The skull of Lazarussuchus inexpectans was only 4 centimeters long. A complete specimen of Lazarussuchus with preserved soft tissue was found from the late Paleocene of France, but has not yet been assigned to any species. Lazarussuchus is the youngest member of Choristodera, and the only Choristoderan to have lived after the Eocene. These reptiles were once thought to have gone extinct at the start of the Eocene, possibly due to climatic changes happening at this time, known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. The first known fossils of Lazarussuchus came from the late Oligocene, meaning that it extended the fossil range of Choristodera by several million years. At the time of its discovery, Lazarussuchus was considered an example of the Lazarus effect because of its unexpected presence following a long gap in the Choristoderan fossil record. However, older specimens of Lazarussuchus have been found that extend its fossil range back to the Eocene and possibly before that, closing the apparent gap in the fossil record. The animal was initially interpreted as the basal-most member of Choristodera, meaning that its lineage must have been the earliest to branch off from the group. Since the first definitive Choristoderans appear in the Middle Jurassic, the lineage represented by Lazarussuchus implied a very long ghost lineage spanning at least 100 million years. This lineage may have been able to survive for such a long period of time and outlast all other Choristoderan lineages because they were small in size and had generalised lizard-like body forms that enabled them to cope with environmental changes. However, Matsumoto et al. Places Catenia genus, the oldest known Choristoderan, as the most basal member of the group, and has Lazarussuchus in a more derived position within a clade of small-bodied Choristoderans known mostly from the early Cretaceous. This position significantly shortens the ghost lineage of Lazarussuchus, although there is still a gap between the disappearance of the small-bodied, lizard-like Choristoderans at the end of the early Cretaceous, and their reappearance in the form of Lazarussuchus in the Paleocene. Possible lizard-like Choristoderans have been found in late Cretaceous North American deposits, although their remains are very fragmentary. The cladistic analysis of Silura Draco by Matsumoto et al. In 2019 also found Lazarussuchus to be more derived than Catenia genus or Silura Draco. An additional subgroup of these smaller Choristoderans may or may not have formed a coherent lineage, the Hyphalosaurids. These were slender, long-necked and small-headed animals that resembled miniature nothosaurs or plesiosaurs. 3 genera may be included here, with Hyphalosaurus being by far the best known. They lived during the early Cretaceous period, about 122 million years ago. The genus contains 2 species, Hyphalosaurus linguanensis and Hyphalosaurus baitiagoensis, both from the Yiqian Formation of Liaoning Province, China. Hyphalosaurus fossils are relatively widespread in the Jehol beds, which represent a series of freshwater lakes. Several specimens of Hyphalosaurus linguanensis and thousands of Hyphalosaurus baitiagoensis are known from the Yiqian Formation, including entire growth series from embryos in eggs to fully grown adults. They had small heads with numerous needle-like teeth and extremely long tails with more than 55 vertebrae. In 2006, the UK Royal Society announced that it had discovered a two-headed fossil of Hyphalosaurus, the first recorded time that such a reptile had ever been fossilised. Hyphalosaurus was covered mostly in small, irregularly patterned polygonal scales, though these varied across the body. The tail itself has preserved soft tissue extending well beyond the margins of the skeleton. This, combined with the already flattened appearance of the tail vertebrae, suggests that a ridge of skin may have extended from the top and bottom of the tail, creating a small fin. The feet and hands also appear to have been webbed. In the holotype specimen of Hyphalosaurus baitiagoensis, several eggs containing embryos were preserved in and around the body. These eggs appear to lack mineralized shells, which G and colleagues later interpreted as evidence that Hyphalosaurus gave birth to live young, and that eggshells never fully developed inside the body of the mother. However, in 2006, G and colleagues re-examined the holotype specimen and noted clearly defined, though thin and leathery, shells. They agreed, however, that these eggs must have developed inside the mother, which would later have given live birth, a reproductive method sometimes called ovovivipary, but were likely expelled from the body when the mother died. Huo and colleagues also described several eggs with flexible shells, containing Hyphalosaurus embryos. These shells were soft, and more similar to the eggs of lizards than to those of crocodiles and birds. This confirmed that Hyphalosaurus and other Choristoderans were viviparous, the only known Mesozoic freshwater reptiles to give birth to live young. Hyphalosaurus was among the most aquatically adapted Choristoderans, with smoother, flatter scales than its relatives, and a tall and flattened tail useful in swimming. Because the torso was fairly inflexible, and the limbs were not particularly adapted for aquatic life, Hyphalosaurus probably swam mainly using its tall, flattened tail. The chest was barrel-shaped, and made up of thick, heavy rib bones, which would have helped the animal stay submerged. Hyphalosaurus appears to have exclusively inhabited deep water lakes. All specimens are preserved in silt characteristic of the deepest part of the lake environment, and are preserved alongside deep water fish and crustaceans. Hyphalosaurus is the most abundant tetrapod in the Yiqian Formation, and probably played an important role in the aquatic food chain. Its fossils are often found preserved alongside the small fish Lycoptera, which may have been a prey item, and at least one specimen preserved fish ribs as stomach contents. A closely related, although significantly larger genus, Shokawa ikoi, is known from the early Cretaceous of Japan. It measured up to 1.8 meters long, and as with Hyphalosaurus, Shokawa had an extremely long, thin neck with a small head. The mouth was filled with long teeth used to snare small fish and crustaceans. An additional Hyphalosaurus relative, Choristodera, lived in the early Cretaceous of Russia and Mongolia, but it is known from poorly preserved remains, and its relationship to other Choristoderans is uncertain. The other main lineage of these reptiles, the Neochoristoderans, were also semi-aquatic but possessed a rather different appearance and ecological niche than their smaller cousins. Noted for their long jaws and large size, these animals were predominant across the northern hemisphere, occurring in freshwater and coastal environments across the Cretaceous and early Cenozoic. These were gharial-like piscivores that inhabited freshwater rivers and lakes, with the clade containing two families, these being Champsosauridae, which includes the genus Champsosaurus, and Semiaquatic, which includes Simodosaurus, Liaochisaurus, Ichthyosaurus, and Choria. Various taxa of uncertain affinities within this group are known, including a specimen from the Cedar Mountain Formation and the Kawajima Formation of Japan. Neochoristoderans first appear in the early Cretaceous of Asia. Here, a regional absence of aquatic crocodilians, possibly due to colder temperatures, seems to have opened the ecological niche for these animals to occupy a similar role. Other than a possible specimen from the Cedar Mountain Formation, a large gap occurs between these early Cretaceous faunas and the late Cretaceous ones. There are no fossils of Neochoristoderans in Asian late Cretaceous deposits, but the subsequent distribution of Simodosaurus in the Paleocene and Eocene implies that there were Asian taxa around at the time, seeing as Simodosauridae is predominantly Asian, and Simodosaurus only propagated wildly after the KPG extinction event. Choristoderans reappear in the fossil record in the Campanian of North America and Europe, and possibly East Timor, under the genus Champsosaurus. This genus survived the KPG extinction event unscathed and diversified in its aftermath, being soon after joined by Simodosaurus. Both taxa remain at high latitudes in North America and Europe until the Eocene, when they mysteriously disappear. Competition from crocodilians has at times been implicated in the extinction of the Neochoristoderans. There appears to have been niche partitioning between these animals and long-snouted crocodilians such as Gharials, which are absent from fresh water sites in Laurasia until well after Neochoristoderans disappear. But competition between both groups, if it even existed, is currently unaccounted for. Ultimately, both Champsosaurus and Simodosaurus coexisted with a variety of broad-snouted species like Alligatorids and Borealisuchus. The most famous of these animals is the North American genus Champsosaurus, which consisted of 7 species ranging in age from the late Cretaceous to the Eocene. Its fossils have been found in North America and Europe. Champsosaurus remains have also been found in the Hell Creek Formation, although most of these remains consist of isolated, fragmented postcranial elements. It grew up to about 1.5 metres long in general, though Champsosaurus gigas, the largest species, reached up to 3.5 metres in length. It probably swam with lateral body movements, pinning its limbs against its body just like crocodilians and the marine iguana. Behind the eyes, Champsosaurus's skull was very wide, where powerful jaw muscles were attached. Due to specializations in hip and limb anatomy, only females could come ashore to lay eggs, while males spent most of their lives in water. The 4 genera within Simodosauridae were generally very similar in appearance and lifestyle, despite being more poorly known. Neochoristoderans are thought to have been fully aquatic. They possess laterally flattened muscular tails and paddle-like limbs. Their torsos are flattened with short but massive ribs, and their gastralia are heavily ossified. While they have their nostrils at the ends of their snouts as in crocodiles, they are oriented forwards at the tip instead of dorsally. Their eye sockets are similarly forward-facing, implying that these animals did not surface often and probably simply rose the snout in a snorkel-like fashion. As in most Choristoderans, the skin lacks scutes, instead having small, smooth, non-overlapping scales. As most Choristoderans are thought to have been ovoviviparous, it is likely that at least some Neochoristoderans were as well. Most of these animals have exceptionally large temporal fenestrae, suggesting powerful bite forces. Champsosaurus is estimated to have a bite force of around 1,194 newtons, as opposed to the modern Gharials' 310 to 497 newtons. In spite of this, most are thought to have had a similar diet to that of Gharials due to the long and slender jaws, though Simodosaurus has a more robust and shorter snout and could have fed on larger prey. Other than the possible fossils from East Timor, nearly all Neochoristoderan remains occur at high latitudes, suggesting a preference for cooler climates, and Champsosaurus fossils are known in the Canadian Arctic and Greenland. Endocast studies on Champsosaurus reveal that the ears were internal and located near the base of the skull. The same study also finds nasal conchae in Neochoristoderans, suggesting that these animals were capable of regulating their body temperature to some extent. Despite this, It appears that these large Choristoderans were not able to cope with the extensive climate changes that occurred towards the end of the Eocene. Although it is not known for certain why they became extinct, it is likely it had something to do with the drying and aridification of Eurasia and North America at the time. Regardless, Choristoderans as a whole survived until the early Miocene in Europe, where the subtropical forested conditions were to the liking of the small genus Lazarussuchus. However, this animal would vanish in due course, leading to the disappearance of this unusual and highly quirky group of reptiles. Thanks for watching, everyone. Next week I'll be covering a bizarre rash of pterosaur sightings reported in modern Britain. See you again soon. Cheerio.